Okay, so our next unit is continuation of evolution. It's evolution of populations. Okay, and to start out, we have a review of natural selection, which I think most of you got the hang of, but just as a reminder. So remember that natural selection says that organisms that are best adapted to their environment are going to survive and reproduce. Some definitions to remind you of. We have species, group of similar organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. And then population is a bunch of members of that species that live together.
Did your first block get all done with all of these notes?
First block is not an honors class.
Oh.
She said first block was slow.
Not my sister's class.
Oh.
Alright, so some components or elements of natural selection. Remember that all species have genetic variation. Nobody in here looks the same, and that is the same for all species. Everybody has slight variations that might give them an advantage or might give them a disadvantage or might not matter at all. The only people that do not have genetic variation are going to be identical twins. They have the same DNA. Most organisms overproduce, meaning they produce more offspring than can be supported by the environment. That brings about competition, and that means that some organisms do not survive that competition.
Sea turtles produce up to 500 eggs, I think, and only 10% of those survive.
And they're doing that right now.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's for some organisms, that's the strategy. A lot of things that lay eggs, especially the squishy eggs like fish and frogs and things like that, they just spray them on out there and hope that some of them survive. Alright, all organisms go through what is called the struggle for existence. And because they overproduce, like I said, there's competition. That means that interactions are going to occur for resources, mating opportunities, and then the ones that have some sort of advantage due to natural variations are going to survive. So this is called struggle for existence. Good. Okay. All right, so organisms that have the best adaptations are going to be the ones that are chosen to reproduce by a mate. They're going to survive, which allows them to reproduce. They're going to make lots of offspring. That's called survival of the fittest. We've used that term before. Remember, that was not Darwin's term, but that's kind of a term that's been associated with his theory of natural selection. So if you end up passing your genes on to the next generation, that is called reproductive success.
Like if you're an organ donor?
No, your genes, like having babies.
Like,
Oh.
Yes,
I knew that.
having babies. If you have babies, you are a reproductive success.
I'm a success.
You have babies.
You're a success.
I was an accident.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
that's-
me too.
It's okay, I was the best
I look
accident.
adopted.
All right, I'm sure the people at home want to hear all these comments about yourselves.
Oh, I forgot about it.
Yeah.
Ours recording.
So remember, the organisms that are reproductive successes are going to be the ones that are considered the fittest or the best. So they're going to pass those fit variations or those successful variations on to the next generation, which hopefully then makes the next generation even more successful and fit. That's the goal.
With our global warming, I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't know. We'll see. We are getting to a point where the lifespan is decreasing instead of increasing. It's like the first time in a long time. All right, we said that all organisms have a common ancestor. But because we do have variations that allow some organisms to survive and reproduce, their descendants are descent with modification, meaning they might be slightly different than the original organisms. We saw that with Darwin's finches. They all came from South America, but where they ended up on the islands was going to determine which traits were going to survive. So they're modified slightly from the original version. Okay, and normally it's because of their habitat. Okay, the type of food that they can eat, the type of space that's available for them, that's going to tend to select, and that's what natural selection is.
I have a question.
Yes, question.
So, with an asexual creature, when they make another one of them, is there even the slightest modification, or are they just exactly the same?
Normally they're exactly the same, but there's always mutations that are possible. And mutations are going to cause all this other stuff as well. So yeah, normally if there's a bunch of asexual reproduction, they're all the same. But that's how you get bacteria and viruses that mutate. Because technically all bacteria should be the same, but they're not because they mutate really quickly.
Which is why every year you need a new flu vaccine.
Correct.
Because the virus mutates into a stronger
Right.
or different version of itself.
Except they're just trying to predict what the new flu vaccine needs to be, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong because they don't know what's going to happen to that virus each year.
I've always wondered what companions of like shot.
Normally it's the weakened or
Weakened
dead
or dead.
version of the virus you're getting the vaccine for.
Yeah, they're just giving you a little dose of the flu, and then your body fights it off, and then you have antibodies
What if it
against
just gives you
the
the
regular flu.
Well,
It does on some people.
No, like what if you just like get sick? Like it's just.
you do.
Some
Yeah,
people
some
do.
people do.
Some
That's a
people-
risk you gotta take.
I'm
Yeah.
allergic to those.
The vaccine is meant to build up other
I'm
things,
allergic
not
to
an
allergy.
immunity. At some point you do.
I can make my own way smaller than yours.
Okay, so here's an example. It says, let's suppose that a wild rabbit population lives in a densely wooded area, has genes that can produce white offspring, brown offspring, or black offspring. How could environmental factors and natural selection affect which variation for fur color occurs most often? Don't read this answer. Which one's going to be the best, most advantageous color for those rabbits if they live in a densely wooded area?
The dark
Brown.
brown.
The brown or possibly the black, but which one's the worst?
White.
The white. Okay, the white's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Those are going to get eaten first, and therefore the population's going to have more brown or black rabbits. Okay. All right, so there are 3 different ways that natural selection can affect the distribution of genes in a species. You have what is called stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection is when natural selection favors the average individuals in a population. So for example, if you have an insect, if you are too big, if you're an insect, you are more visible to predators. You're going to get eaten if you're too big. If you're too small, you might not be able to catch prey or defend yourself also against predators or just your environment. So average size insects, just being the normal size insect, is going to be an advantage in that population. Okay, and you've probably seen curves like this before, okay, where these are going to be your favorite individuals, and then eventually the curve is going to get higher because you're going to have more average individuals because the average individuals are going to be the ones that reproduce. So this is stabilizing selection. I always think of being stable, like if you want to stabilize something, you put something in the middle of it, like a table, to stabilize it.
A level.
Level, yes. All right, directional selection favors one direction, not the group, but one extreme form of the traits. Okay, so here's an example. You have some finches. It says, during a drought, food became scarce and the finches with larger beaks were better suited for survival and reproduction. As a result, the average beak size increased. Okay. So it could be larger, something larger. It could be something smaller if that's a benefit. It could be faster, Like if you have a rabbit that can run faster than the other rabbits, that's going to be an advantage. So that's going to be directional selection. So the peak of your graph, these individuals are favored, so there's eventually going to be more of these. So your peak is going to shift in one direction. And it doesn't have to be to the right or to the left, it could be either way. Yes?
We have a screener tomorrow?
Yes, I was going to talk about that after we're done with this.
Sorry, we got a problem.
All right, we got this. I know we have a problem. Just let me finish this and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so anybody ever heard of the case of the peppered moth before? Have you talked about that in any of your other science or history or anything
Negative.
classes? No. Okay.
Yeah.
You think
No.
they will? Maybe. Okay, so peppered moth.
Fifth grade.
I need my
Fifth grade.
pointer here. All right, so peppered moth, there are two body colors of the peppered moth. You have this black body color, and then you have the peppered version, which is salt and pepper, so it's mostly white but has some black specks on it. Okay, back in England, before the Industrial Revolution, the tree trunks looked like this. They were white tree trunks, okay, and you had these two versions of the peppered moth. When birds came to eat the moths, which one are they going to see first?
Black.
The black ones. So the black ones are going to get eaten. So over time, you're going to have more peppered ones survive. Once the Industrial Revolution happened, we started putting all the smoke up into the sky. England back then was really, really like sooty and smoggy and lots of air pollution. So the tree trunks caught that air pollution. Now the tree trunks are darker. So which moth is more visible here?
White.
More visible, yeah. The
I
white
only see
one.
one moth.
There's one down here. See, if you were a
Oh,
bird,
I
you would
see
not
it
find
now.
this one. Yeah, so if you were a bird, you would get this one. Okay, so this is the classic example that we give for directional selection because over time it favored the darker moths. Now, once they started figuring out air pollution is bad, they started scrubbing their factories and not letting as much pollution out in the air. The trees have started to come back to be more like this, and now the white ones can make a comeback. Okay? But that's directional selection. All right, and then the third one is disruptive selection. You're not going to see this a whole lot, but this is going to favor both extremes and eliminates the traits in the middle, eliminates the average individuals. So an example of this, which is usually not going to happen, but it says if only very large seeds and very small seeds were available, then large and small beaks have the advantage, and the ones with the medium-sized beaks are going to go extinct. Well, in nature, that's probably not going to happen very often, that you just have large ones and small ones. You're always going to have some in the middle. So this one's going to be the least common one, but it could happen at some point. So any questions on either of those three types of selection? You got stabilizing, directional, and disruptive. Okay, I think that's it for today.
Are you serious?
For notes.
Awesome.
Wow.